What's going on, y'all? Welcome to the Kettlebell Guys show. In the next two episodes, it's going to be a two-part series where Sean and I talk about a theme from the book called The Alchemist, where when you follow your personal legend, the whole world conspires in your favor. And so, with that being said, we had a ton of fun filming this and recording it, and I think you guys are going to love it. So, with that being said, here's part one. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 3 of the Kettlebell Guys show. I am Coach Grant, one of the co-hosts, sitting here with my guy, Coach Sean. What's up, Sean?
How are you, Grant?
Fantastic. I'm fantastic. I'm actually incredibly excited for this episode because I get to interview you, kind of. I get to dig into your life and
Oh
ask
boy.
you juicy questions.
Wow. I'm
Uh,
nervous.
Yeah, but we have kind of a theme and a goal and I think a backstory as to what we're going to be talking about today. So do you want to kind of give the thought process of what this theme is?
Yes. Yes, I do. Okay. So let's see if we can start at the beginning of this, which is probably 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when my sister Margaret was still in high school. She had to read a book called The Alchemist in one of her high school classes. She gave me that book and she said, "You have to read this." And so I read it. And it's a book now that I've read probably a dozen times in the last decade.
How old were you
Um,
when you first read it?
Boy, I had to be young 20s, I
Okay.
would think. I feel like I was probably out of college, but probably just out of college because I think the first time I read it, I was already out of college. The key message that has always stuck with me from The Alchemist, and this is something that I've always tried to communicate, to anyone who will listen,
Well, listen, right.
anyone who will ask me for advice, even if they didn't ask me for advice, is when you follow your personal legend, the world conspires in your favor. And I was thinking through we were thinking through podcast ideas and, we were thinking through, okay, so should we do more tactical stuff or should we have another episode that's a little bit more, kind of general out there in the, in the
Out
clouds
in
a little bit.
out in the
Uh,
ether, out in the mystic.
Right, right. And we'll get to plenty of tactical stuff as we, continue to build up episodes here. But, I think we both wanted to just be able to kind of get our stories across to people first to hopefully just, build that sense of us being, real guys, with real life experiences. And I
Yeah.
happen to have some very specific world conspiring in my favor from following my personal legend stories that I was able to kind of think through and identify. And so thought it would
Yeah.
be cool to share them today. And hopefully it's something that, if there's anybody listening to this who has been thinking about job change, picking up a new habit, moving, or just anything that they've been like feeling like they wanted to do, but for one reason or another, they have not taken the action necessary to do it. Hopefully this can just be like a push, a general nudge into that direction to lean into that because it can
Yeah.
be scary, but big things happen.
I love the fact that you and I get to do this because we get to kind of go back and look at the last 12 plus years of our life because we've spent just over a decade together, you and I. And so we get to look at all
Work
these things.
wives.
Yeah, as work wives. Yeah. And we get to look at all these things that have shaped us. And that's what I like most about being able to do this podcast because we get to actually just share those things.
Yeah.
And because we've we've sure as heck talked just you and me without a mic in front of us about all this stuff enough times.
Yeah.
So I love the fact we get to do that. And also I'll say this too, so much of the stuff that I feel very excited to share, including this, like themes of this, what we're going to talk about today, is because of you. You had such a big impact, I think, on me of like when you found this stuff in your life, then you shared it with me. And then I ended up having my own just revelations and insights and personal growth was so because, like I found you. So for those of you that maybe have not read The Alchemist yet, no spoilers, but if you haven't read
Yeah.
it, make sure you go read it. But it
Right.
is basically the high level is about this guy who feels called to go on his own personal journey of his, and he experiences a wide range of challenges and setbacks, whatever word you want to call it, along the journey that he ultimately, any regular person would have maybe quit, right? Would have stopped, but he just continued to push forward, and obviously it leads to the end of the book, which I won't give away for anyone who wants to read it.
Yeah, don't do that.
But the
Go read
theme,
the book.
yeah, go read the book. But the theme being like, when you follow your personal legend, the whole world conspires in your favor. And so, Seamus, what we want to do on this episode is there are specific examples in your life where you feel like that has been so true for you. And so, why don't we start at the first example of where you felt like that was a huge, looking back on it, that theme was big in your life.
It was interesting when I was thinking through this particular subject matter, there was a very specific example that came to mind, and I'm going to get to that one for sure. It was actually the one that brought you and I together. Since, for anyone listening, Grant and I didn't know each other before Chicago Primal Gym, but I'll get to that in a second. I was thinking back through the various times in my life where I felt like the world did conspire in my favor, and I identified some stuff even just yesterday where I was like, dang, I actually never realized that happened that way. And
Or
so,
where you went against traditional thinking, like you
right,
followed your own path.
right. And so the first one was actually choosing to study abroad my senior year of college. So I studied abroad in Ireland. Before we put the recording on, I was saying, hopefully if my dad listens to this, he'll understand and remember this story. When I told my dad I wanted to study abroad, he actually initially said, I don't want you to do that. And, I got so upset at first, just like, how could you not want me to have an experience like that? And, there was a lot of back and forth argument. And eventually my dad said to me, which is something that has always stuck with me, is just like showing how much he cares about uh, myself and my brother and sister. But he said, and this is, I feel like was like, I hope my dad doesn't mind me saying this, but I feel like this was a big moment. Like this was a time that he really opened up to me in a way that, really I can't remember him opening up in that way. But he said, I've worked my whole life and saved so that I could pay for you kids to all go to college. And we just didn't have the money to stretch beyond that to have me go study abroad because it was a fairly expensive program. And I wanted to take out student loans to go study abroad. And my dad said, it was almost like a point of pride for him, right? That he was able to save up and sacrifice in his career
Right.
and, probably choose to not do a lot of things that he wanted to do in his own life because he had 4 kids and because he wanted to put those kids through school. Right.
Right.
And so finally, I was able to, convince him to allow me to apply for student loans, which I got. Ended up going and studying abroad. Amazing experience. But the crazy part about that, the crazy like world conspiring in my favor, and I just realized this yesterday as I was thinking through this experience, because this is really, I feel like the first time that the world conspired in my favor because I followed my personal legend. Because I felt like my personal legend was to study abroad, was to go
Yeah.
experience another country, was to go experience the Irish culture, was just to do something that no one in my family had ever done, and just something that I felt called to do. Going through college leading up to that point, this was my first semester of senior year. So this was like the last semester of junior year that I was doing all the planning for this. At that point in time, a lot of the kids who I went to high school with also went to my college. And so even though I had friends at college, I had never really made any close friends that weren't guys who I already knew from growing up and from high school, right? And that was always something that really upset me. Like, man, I want to create a wider network. I want to have more friends that I didn't know so that I have, college friends, not just high school friends
Right.
that I went to college with, right? Because one of the things that my dad always talked to me about was like all of the great friends that he met when he went to college who were still his friends, to this day. And I just thought like, boy, that's so cool. I want that as well. So I study abroad. And while I'm studying abroad, a couple months left in being there. I was there for 4 months. So this is probably halfway through it. I did not have anywhere to live my second semester of senior year. I hadn't figured it out yet. I'm just like, I'm going to wing it. to figure something out when I get back to school. I was clearly only focused on the studying abroad part, not the like, how am I going to wrap up my senior year of college? Anyway, I reach out on Facebook Messenger, which this is 2007. So I'm pretty sure I had to like poke the person first, to be able to then
Right.
create a message with them. So I reached out to this guy who I had one class with, and we were on a team for like a class project. We had never even hung out. We weren't even friends or anything like that. We just, you know, through conversation, I knew that he was studying abroad because we were on a team together the last semester of junior year. So I had met him. We had recently met just right before we both studied abroad. I knew that he was studying abroad in Italy. And so I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, where are you living when you get back to IU?" And he's like, "Oh, I'm staying with my buddies. We got this big house." And he's like, "I might have an extra, there might be an extra room if you're interested." And I'm like, "Yes, I'm very interested." And so it turns out that I go live with this group of guys. And so that guy was John Lamancuso, my friend from Jamestown, New York, who went to IU and was
Hmm.
studying abroad in Italy. And I lived in a house with a bunch of guys who now to this day, let's see, we're in 2024 and this was 2008. So what's the math on that? 16 years
16
ago?
years. Right.
These guys are all still my good buddies. Rasa,
Right.
Ari, Adam, Steve, John. Like these are guys who I had never met at IU, and we had one semester together. That was it. And let me tell you, we had some fun. We did some good partying, but these guys all became really close friends and are still close friends to this day. So it's like followed my personal legend.
Right. All of that from the one decision.
Exactly. It's almost like what we talked about in the last episode, which is like people only fear what they have to lose, right?
Right.
But that's because it's so difficult to understand what you have to gain because the truth is you don't know what you have to gain until you actually do the thing that scares you. And I was
Right.
scared to study abroad. I was scared to leave the United States, to leave my family, to, you know, kind of go against my dad's wishes, and
Right.
just to be on my own and to be alone in a place that I'd never been before. But then sure enough, it was that decision that led to me creating friendships that have, been going for 16 years strong now. I mean, my daughter and Ari's daughter hang out, quite often. They were in dance class together. It's like that
Right.
would have never happened had I not gone and studied abroad. So that was the
Well,
first instance.
yeah, and I think like we said last week, I think it comes down to kind of like your default operating system. I remember personally for me, I said this a lot to my friends and parents, but I specifically remember saying it a lot to the girl that I had dated for a very long time. I remember saying to her, everything always works out. Everything will work out. Even when I had no idea what the end result was going to be, whatever the situation was. But I think it's similar, like of like what point A is, what the first step is. You might not know what point B, C, D, E, F, and G are. I saw a thing. This is a little bit of a tangent. I saw a video the other day of Cillian Murphy, the actor. It was like, "What's your advice for 20-something-year-olds?" And he said, "Go off of instinct, instinct, instinct." He's like, "Don't worry about logic." He's like, "If you can't logically put it together, that doesn't matter. All it matters
Right.
is if it feels right,
So
especially
true.
when you're young. And as long as it's your instinct is there and it feels right for you, then it's right for you."
Yeah.
And so for me personally, I just used to always say that to myself that like everything will always work out. It will work out some way,
Right.
shape, or form.
Right.
And I do think that it is important to say that like I'm privileged to say that. I'm personally privileged to be able to have experiences in my life that have gone that way for me, which
Sure.
helps me adopt that mindset.
Right.
Uh, and so I do think there is that. It's worth it to acknowledge it,
Of
but
course.
I also think that it's a choice, right? You choose to believe that, or you can choose to not believe it, because there's also the belief of like you could choose to be a skeptic at all times,
Right.
but like, if choose to look for that, then you're probably always going to find that. Uh,
Sure. And of course, not everyone's going to have the opportunity to, you know, have their parents pay for them to go to college,
right,
have access to
of course,
loans from the government at a low interest rate to be able to go do this, right?
of
Like
course.
those opportunities aren't available to everyone. But I do think that within whatever means you have available to you, there is the choice to follow what you believe you're being called to versus being
100%.
scared to do that and choosing not to.
Correct. 100%. I couldn't agree more. Okay, so that was your first experience. So you first kind of like, okay, I'm going against the norm. I'm going against maybe my family's thought process, their wishes of what I should do because I believe it's the right thing for me. Led you down the road of studying abroad, led you down the road of
Right.
lifelong friendships that you now have from one semester in college, which
Yeah.
is that's just the best. Okay, so there's multiple instances of this. So what would you say your next instance was on your timeline?
So the next instance, and really, I think it's important to acknowledge that it doesn't get easier to follow your personal legend.
Probably gets harder.
It maybe does, especially as you kind of get more and more responsibilities or more and
Right.
more comfortable in whatever, life you're in. I mean, it's one thing to be a junior slash senior in college with virtually no responsibilities
Right.
versus where I am today, two kids, mortgage,
Right.
family, what have you. But
Right.
what I will say is doing that and following my personal legend and being able to apply it to the lesson from The Alchemist, it's like you kind of said before, like it became a way of living for me.
Right.
Right? It became an identity that I was able to build. Like I am just going to choose to be somebody who creates my own path in life, who does what feels right. Fortunately for me, what felt right was trying to help people, trying to find a way to make an impact in the world. And so I took a job out of college, which slight tangent, I'm remembering another time of the world conspiring in my favor that I didn't put in my notes, but this was actually the next version because I interviewed for a job with a company called Eaton, and they were hiring for this rotational finance position, which is where you would essentially go work in like these 10-month stints at different things within the finance part of Eaton, which is this big power and manufacturing company. And they had plants all over the United States in just like not great locations, just like small town, Arkansas,
Right.
middle of nowhere, Michigan. Like, no offense to
Sure.
anyone who lives there, like, but that just isn't where I wanted to go coming out of college, right?
Right.
So I turn it down, and then probably, I don't know, a month before I graduate from school, I get a call at like 11 a.m. on my cell phone. And of course, at 11 a.m., I'm still sleeping. It's college. And so I wake up and I'm like, hello. And this guy's like, hey, it's Brian. He's like, hey man, I got some terrible news. And I'm like, what? And I'm like still in a daze. I'm like, did something happen that I don't know about? Like that somehow Brian knows about? He's like, I heard you turned down the the finance position that we offered you. And I'm like, oh yeah, this here's why I did that. I just didn't want to not know where I was going to be. I didn't want to have to go around all these different places. I'm like, that's not my personal legend. So I'm not going to do it. So he's like, well, how would you just like to come and work with me directly? I'm like, okay. I'm like, Brian happened to work for the aerospace company that was in Southern California,
Right.
Orange County. And so I'm like, oh, so my ears perk up a little bit.
I don't mind Southern California.
So he offers me a job working in the C-level suite directly below him because he was on his way to being the CFO, a better salary, a better signing bonus, location certainty, and I move out to Southern California 2 months later. That was where I worked for the first 18 months. Now, I will say, I knew that I
this,
didn't want to do that
this is
because
so good. It's so good because I know where the story goes next. It's so good.
so anyway, my I remember sitting there with John Lamancuso, and telling him when I got this offer because I also had another offer from a company here in Chicago that I interned with to go and work in their finance department. And I remember saying to him, "I'm going to take this job, but not because I want it, but because I want to prove to myself that this isn't what I want to do with my life. This corporate climbing the ladder, this just isn't going to work for me. I could just feel it. Like I just knew that it wouldn't work well. So anyway, I took the job. I kind of felt like, hey, I got this degree. Like, my parents paid for me to go to IU. Like I felt like I owed it to more than just them to like at least see it through. So I took the job. I'll be honest, I hated it. It was everything I thought it was going to be. It was totally not right for me. Felt like, I was doing nothing of any meaning, didn't like the work I was doing, talked with a number of people. I was fortunate enough to work in the executive offices with, the CEO of a $2 billion aerospace company, the CFO, a bunch of people who are high up in the organization. And I would have these individual conversations with these people. And the common theme was, and I mean this, the common theme amongst these people, which like half of them are divorced, the common theme was, boy, I'd give anything to go back to being your age because I'd do everything differently. And I'm
Mm,
like, well, if you all are sitting in these top positions within this company and all you can say to me is how much you wish you could go back and change things,
right.
like,
What am I
why would I
doing
stay
here?
on this path?
Right.
So that
What
was
am I
like,
doing here?
exactly like, boy. And so I spent a solid 12 out of the 20 months that I was working at that company looking for different work, just trying to find something else that I could do.
And so my question there, because what you did at that aerospace company was like what you went to college for, or at least it was in that field,
Yeah.
because you were finance, right?
Right.
Finance background.
Hmm.
So when you were looking for other jobs, were you looking in the same field, or were you looking for something completely different? What was that time period like before you even took the next step?
Yeah. So I was looking at AmeriCorps, uh, you know, thinking, hey, maybe I'll go back overseas. I was looking for teaching positions. I interviewed to do liquor sales because my dad was in the liquor sales business throughout his career. So he set me up with an interview with Southern Wine and Spirits out there in Southern California. I was looking for anything that was what I wasn't doing.
Right.
Literally anything. I was volunteering. I coached a basketball team for the Boys and Girls Club. I did
Yeah.
like after school volunteer at this elementary school for underprivileged kids. I was trying to do anything I could to like find some meaning and
Yeah.
find some level of impact because otherwise I was just sitting in these corporate offices just doing nothing, just doing
And
work I
so
didn't care about.
how long were you at it was Eaton, right? The name.
Yeah.
How
Yep.
long were you there?
So I was there for 20 months from the time that I graduated college. Like I said, for the last 12 months, I was looking hard. And for the last 6 months, I was really like, I was talking to my dad every week, like, Dad, I got to get out of here.
Well, I'm just going to say, I think this is a really important part too, because I remember what you've told me about the conversations that you have with your
Yeah.
dad, right? And I know
Right.
you're going to get to it, but I just wanted to interject and be like, dude, this is such a huge part of this story, which
Right.
is another, I think, uh, interaction with your dad and like such a huge stamp on your life of
Truly.
like what has created the Sean Griffin that I know and
Yeah.
that so many people know.
Right.
Uh, so sorry, go continue.
It's a great point. Brings a big smile on my face to think about this. Before the conversation with my dad, though, I can remember talking with my brother Pat a lot, and he owns a company here in Chicago. And at the time, his company was very young. I mean, they had just started. And I was talking to him about like, I hate this. I don't want to do it. Like maybe I could do my own thing. And he gave me the best advice that I've maybe ever gotten from someone from an entrepreneurship perspective. He said, dude, if you want to start a company, you just start a company. Like that was it. And now looking back on it after, owning my own businesses for the last decade, it's like that's the truth. Like there's, you know, most people don't ever own businesses simply because they don't start one. But like the barrier to start a business these days is nothing. It's
Yeah.
internet connection, you
Get an
know?
LLC, get a bank
Right.
account, and then talk to someone and exchange money for something.
Yeah. So I can remember talking to my dad week after week. I want to get out of this. I can't stand this. Like, gotta find something else. And he kept reminding me, like, it's 2009. The housing market had just crashed. They laid off like 10,000 employees from Eaton out of the 60,000. I don't know how I didn't get laid off because I promise you I didn't do anything of any value for that company.
I remember
But
you telling me that your last few months you were purposely doing the least you could do
yeah,
just
I
to
mean,
see what would happen.
I had no real responsibility. And my dad's like, all your buddies would be so, they'd be so lucky if they had your job. Like most people can't even find work right now. And I remember finally, I was just like, Dad, I am miserable. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. And he's like, all right, then quit. And I put in my 2 weeks notice the next day, but I needed his permission, and I didn't necessarily need it, but I did, right? Like I needed someone who at that point in time was, the person who had guided me,
Yeah.
to where I was at that point to say, okay, it's okay. It's going to
Yeah.
be okay. You're going to be able to make it work. Because at that point, I just didn't believe in myself. I didn't have all the beliefs that I have now I was 22. I wasn't 37. I didn't have or 38. I didn't have the experiences and,
No evidence yet.
no evidence. So he said, fine. So I quit. That was, following my personal legend. Now I quit with nothing to do. I had no idea. I didn't have any job prospects. All I knew was that my sister was going to fly out to Chicago. I was going to pack up my Hyundai Elantra that I had, and we were going to drive back across the country, which is exactly what we did. So we drive back across the country, and I moved to Chicago with no job, no job prospects. My brother, his company was, very young, and he was like, well, I could probably give you, enough work so that you can make $1,000 a month. So I'm like, great. So I moved to Chicago, move in with my buddy Kevin. We get a apartment together. I go on a walk, probably my second or third day there. We lived close to Lincoln Park. Didn't even know it. I go out, I wake up at 5 a.m. I'm like, well, I got to go for a walk. So I go out and I'm walking around at 5 a.m. I walk through Lincoln Park. I run into Adam Hausman, my buddy who I had just met at college. He was one of the guys that I lived with. I see like a bunch of like a farmer's market getting set up, and I fell in love with farmers markets in California. I'm like, oh, cool. So I'll go over there, and he's like, Sean, what are you doing? I'm like, what are you doing? This dude's from New York, so I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I work at the farmers market. I'm like, well, that sounds awesome. Boom, end up with a job at the farmers market. So now I'm working at the farmers market. I'm working for my brother part time, and my brother connects me with his friend Mike Madonis, who is a guy that he grew up with. And Mike, uh, at the time, had just gone through a pretty substantial physical transformation. He lost like 60 pounds. He was doing all kinds of functional fitness, which at the time,
Cross
I look
training,
back on
right?
it. Yeah, he was cross training. I mean, this is
Cross
like
training.
before CrossFit was even a thing, but he was like, battle ropes, sledgehammer on the tire, climbing ropes, all kinds of crazy stuff. And so I started working out with him. That's what led me to eventually to the fitness world, which
Right.
is crazy, right? Because it's like just making this decision at this one point in time, just saying I've had enough, I gotta leave. And that's the next thing about, I feel like that's one of the key lessons that I've learned over and over and over again, which is when you follow your personal legend, you don't necessarily need to know what comes next. You need to know the thing that you have to do. And like the thing that I had to do was I had to quit that job. If I would have
Right.
not quit that job, all the things that came to pass from there never would have happened, because I never would have had the ability to go experience those things. I never would have ran into Adam at the farmer's market and started to get work there that would have put me in a position to be able to, because I spent so many days working at the farmer's market in the morning and then studying anatomy and physiology the rest of the day, because I wasn't stuck in some job where I had to be there from 8 to 5,
Yeah.
right? Moving back to Chicago with nothing to do. And then all of a sudden I connect with this guy who had just made this big fitness transformation. I didn't have fitness on my mind at the time. I just knew that I wanted to help people. I knew that I was
Right.
interested in, like, I thought I was maybe going to be a teacher or something like that.
Before we get into the fitness side of the story, you said you were at Eaton for 20 months.
Mm-hmm.
And you said when you took that job, you're like, I'm going to take this job. I'm going to confirm that it's not what I want to do with my life. So, for everyone out there that has had a similar experience or maybe is going through a similar experience, can you talk about the process for you of what was it like to go from the idea of I know I don't want to be here to still then being there for 20 months to the point where you decided like I have to leave and then actually
Mm.
verbalizing that out loud? What do you think was the biggest things that you went through from like an emotional standpoint? And then also my question is like, what was the breaking point? Why was it 20 months instead of 24 months or
Mm.
30 months? What was your breaking point? And also, if your breaking point could have been at 2 months, Why did it go an extra 18
Why did it
months?
take so long? Yeah,
Right.
that's a great question. I've often asked myself that question. And what I kind of realized, especially as I was going back and thinking through this, this topic for today was, I did the same thing with starting Chicago Primal Gym. I looked at the space that I ended up putting Chicago Primal Gym in 10 months before I signed the lease on that space. And for that 10 months, it's not like I wasn't trying to start the gym. I looked at probably 30 different spaces. I would ride my bike past the space that I ended up moving into every week, just thinking like, gosh, there's no way this is going to work. But it's the only one that I found that seems to make sense. And I remember starting Chicago Primal Gym and finally signing a lease. And Pat was like, I was starting to think that you were never going to do it. And I was like, yeah, me too. And so I've come to realize that it oftentimes takes me a lot longer to actually take action on the thing that I feel that I need to take action on. And I think a lot of people probably resonate with that. Like, so you might be a couple months into this feeling that you need to do something like quit your job, for instance, or start a business or whatever it is. And maybe
Right.
you're not quite ready yet. And like to be honest with you, I can't exactly think back to what my true breaking point was. I don't remember what drew me out that day where I can remember standing on the side of the building and saying to my dad, like, Dad, I'm just so miserable here. I have to quit. I don't remember exactly what that was. I knew that I had gotten a new boss, that Brian, the guy who hired me, left the company probably 4 or 5 months before that. And they assigned me a new boss who was not headquartered where I was. He was headquartered in Cleveland. And so I essentially had no responsibility and no boss. So like literally I'm not even kidding when I tell you I had nothing to do at all. The CFO called me into his office and he was like a new CFO and he's like, "Yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of what everyone's doing. So could you just like write down on this pad of paper like all the responsibilities?" And it's like this big long pad of paper. And I come back a little bit later. I'm like, "Okay, I wrote everything down." And I handed it to him and I remember there were two things on it. The rest of the paper was blank. And he's like, "This is all you do?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, that's all I do." Like that's it. It was literally 1 day worth of work in the entire month cycle. That was it. But it took me a long time. And honestly, the reason it took me so long, there's no better answer than just to say I was scared. I was scared of facing the uncertainty of leaving. I thought I needed something that I was certain that I was going to do in order to leave the thing that I knew that wasn't right for me. But this is what I've learned over and over and over again in my life. And this is the whole reason that I wanted to do this podcast. You don't need to know for certain what you're going to do because you have no idea the wheels that you will set into motion when you actually do the one thing that you do need to do. The one thing I had to do was I had to get out of that job. I had to quit that job. And I finally realized either I quit this job or I don't know, I give up on life. I mean, I don't even know. And so it's like,
Right.
it's like, okay, fine. I don't need to know what I'm going to do because I just can't do this anymore. And so I quit. And then all of a sudden, all these crazy things start to conspire. I run into Adam. I get a job at the farmer's market. I connect with Mike. We start working out consistently. 2 months after moving to Chicago, I meet Amanda, who's now my wife. Like, come on. Had I not
Yeah.
made that decision,
Who knows? I would
who
never known
knows?
you, probably.
Right. And you can't ever understand. And getting back to the next example of following my personal legend, which maybe this is the very biggest one and probably the one that's been the most instrumental in my entire life, which was, at least from a professional standpoint, since certainly moving back to Chicago and meeting Amanda was my biggest period. Love you,
Biggest.
sweetie.
Yeah. 100%.
Which, by the way, I had a girlfriend at the time in California when I quit my job and was moving back to Chicago, and we were planning to stay together and try to make it work long distance. And I can still remember walking into her apartment like 2 days before I was going to leave, and I opened the door, and right to the right of the door was her kitchen, and she was cooking eggs. And I can remember this. She's like, "Hey," and I was like, "We got to talk." She's like, "What?" I was like, "We can't stay together when I move to Chicago." It's like, "I need a clean break." It was such a hard moment. It was gut wrenching. I knew that we weren't right for each other the whole time we dated, but she was just an amazing person. And like it hurt really bad to do that, to
Right.
burn that bridge, right? But again, it's like I never would have met Amanda 2 months later. So
Right.
sometimes you just know that your personal legend is calling you to do something else than you're doing. You don't necessarily know what it's calling you to do, but you know that what you're doing now is not what's right. It's not your personal legend, right? It took me 10 months to open Chicago Primal Gym from the time that I first saw the space that ended up putting Chicago Primal Gym in. Now I did some fundraising in that time, got a loan from my dad, drained my 401k that I had built up from Eaton. So I spent 10 months, preparing for Chicago Primal Gym, writing out every workout, planning out everything that you could possibly think of, trying to get a marketing plan perfect, trying to figure out every single detail. Of course, none of which I ended up doing once the gym actually opened, because the one thing that really prevented me from opening the gym that whole time was the same thing that prevented me from leaving Eaton. It was the fear of uncertainty. I just wasn't confident that opening the gym was going to work. I had never had a single client of my own at that point. I had never trained anyone. I worked at the gym that Mike Madonna started for 7 months, coaching his group classes, and I did 3 unpaid internships before that. But I had never had my own clients. I didn't know anything about running a business, and I didn't feel confident at all in my own fitness. I didn't feel confident in my own strength. I didn't feel confident in the way that I looked. I didn't feel confident in my ability to coach other people. I just knew I wanted to help, but I was scared. I was real scared to do it on my own because I didn't feel like I could sell. I didn't feel like I could handle, trying to run a business, coach classes, market and sell. So I asked my good friend Eric to be my partner. And for the first probably 3, 4 months of this whole concept of Chicago Primal Gym happening, we weren't open yet, but the planning phases, I'll call it. He was going to be my partner. He was even signed on the original LLC documents. He was going to move from Indianapolis and come to Chicago, even though all of our friends were like, there's no way that's actually going to happen. Sure enough, 3, 4 months down the road, he's like, I don't think I can do it. I just can't do it. I mean, he didn't have any experience in the fitness world. He just, we just thought it'd be great to be business partners because we were such good friends.
Right.
So he backs out. Then I asked my good friend Kevin to be my partner. I'm like, you can sell, I'll do the coaching, we'll run it together. So then for like maybe a week, he was going to be my partner. And then he's like, I just don't think it'd be a good idea. It's like I wouldn't want anything to come between our friendship. And he just didn't feel confident in his ability either because he didn't have a fitness background either. I was like, so the whole time I'm just terrified. I'm like, I can't do this alone. I got to have a partner. Like if I don't have someone who can like do the marketing and sales, I just won't be able to succeed. But eventually something happened. I don't know what, but something happened. And finally, 10 months later, I signed the lease on the space. I think it was more than anything, probably weather that was driving it because I had some friends who train in my back courtyard in the summer and I signed the lease at the end of October. I'm like, if I don't sign this lease, like these, 6 guys who are training with me, they're not going to have anywhere to go in the winter. And like, I'm going to lose all the momentum. And it's like, it's okay. It's freaking now or never. It's like,
Right. That's a good point.
so I signed a lease, and this is the next example really of the world conspiring in my favor, because I signed that lease right at the end of October, opened the gym 2 weeks into November, and in February you emailed me out of nowhere, literally out of nowhere. I had never met you, never heard of you, and I open up my email and it's like, "Dear Mr. Griffin, my name is Grant Anderson." Like, okay. It's like, and I remember showing it to Amanda at the time. I'm like, look, this dude's asking for a job. He's got no idea that I have no clients and I don't make any money. Like, that'd be pretty funny. Not sure what kind of job he thinks he's going to get since I'm making like $1,500 a month at this point. That was the next and probably the biggest example because what I was so scared of was opening the gym on my own and being able to do it on my own. And I spent so much time trying to find a partner before I open the gym, thinking if I don't have a partner before I open this gym, it's going to fail. But the truth is that I needed to open the gym to find my partner. Because as soon as I opened the gym, okay, now within 90 days, this random ass dude hits me up. And now we've been partners for going on 10 years now.
Yeah.
And there's no way that would have happened. You would have never, ever came into my life had I not done the thing that scared me the most, which was opening the gym alone. For whatever reason, that felt like my personal legend to do it. And somehow, I don't know what it was. I think it was just the belief that like you said, like it'll work out. It was honestly the belief that my prior experiences and the lesson that the Alchemist had taught me, which is if you follow your personal legend, the world will conspire in your favor. And whether or not I was telling myself that exact thing at the time, I don't know.
Right.
But that's definitely what was driving it. It's just like it's going to work out because this just feels right. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was probably the biggest one.
It's pretty cool to think about too, because you're so right, which is just like the thought process of you had to open the gym for us to come together. Because when I like my experience of that was seeing, Googling, my quick story on that, which I'm sure we'll do a show that'll dig into my story. But my experience of that entire thing was working at a gym in Rockford, Illinois, knew I wanted to move to Chicago, Googled gyms in Chicago, found Chicago Primal Gym. My perception of Chicago Primal Gym wasn't oh, this guy is new and has no idea what he's doing. My perception was, oh, this gym is just started in November, because I saw it was like established in November 2013. And my assumption was it looks like it's new, like I could get in when there's no one else there yet and I could help. But my perception was that you had a lot of shit figured out. Like at the time, I was like, because your website was great. And when I went to my first Saturday class, which is its own show in and of itself, everything went so well. You ran the class well, you were confident. Just from my perspective as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old kid, was like, man, this guy's doing what I want to do. This guy's got his own business. He's got obviously has fans. It's a fun Saturday class. And so, my perception of that was that you had a lot of shit figured out.
Mm,
You knew what you were doing, whether you felt it or not.
yeah.
But I think you being able to connect those dots there, right? Because like whether you felt that way, or you didn't feel that way, like I perceived it that way, which drew me into CPG, drew me to you.
Yeah. Right.
I would have never perceived that had you not taken those steps and had you not made those decisions,
Mm,
despite feelings of fear or just anxiousness or whatever it was.
yeah. It's interesting because you say, it seemed like I had it figured out. And I can assure you that I did not feel that at all. I think the truth is that most people feel what I felt as well, which is I've got this personal legend, but most people, I don't think follow their personal legend. I think they go the comfortable route. They stay in a job that they don't really love because it provides a sense of security for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why a lot of people, at least in my own personal experience, have been able to look at me and be like, well, you have it figured out, right? And I think that's really just them saying, you look like you actually did the thing that you were being called to do. Not necessarily saying like you look so successful doing it, but just like you did the thing that you have been called to do. And that's, I think, a rarity, honestly, which makes me sad and is one of the main reasons I wanted to do this podcast, was just like hoping that even one person listening to this would be like, all right, this is what I needed to hear in order to go and do that thing. Cause it's scary. It's really scary because you think that you need to have all the details figured out before you do the thing. But that's the furthest thing from the truth, because
Right.
once you do the one thing, like take that first action towards your personal legend, the world starts to conspire in your favor in ways that you could have never, ever possibly predicted or
Right.
considered. I could have never planned for all the things that have transpired since the move. I did not have fitness on my mind whatsoever when I quit my job, but now I've spent the last 12 years in the fitness industry, owning two businesses, training tens of thousands of people. I could have never planned for that when I was standing there on the side of the building. I just knew that I had to quit that job. I just knew that my personal legend was calling me to do something else. I don't know how many friends I've pushed towards just like, dude, just quit your job. Like if you're that miserable,
Right.
you don't need to know what's going to come next, because you won't be able to ever have a next unless you part ways with this thing that's currently holding you back and holding you down.
Thanks for tuning in to part one of the Follow Your Personal Legend podcast. In part two, Sean and I are going to dig more into the decision we made to shut down Chicago Primal Gym and how challenging that decision was at the time, but ultimately it led us to what we do now, which is run the Kettlebell Transformation community. And so if you like part one, you're going to love part two.